the openness is really the strength of SONiC, and Microsoft made a really critical decision when they decided to open source SONiC and hand it over to the Linux Foundation to manage it as a project, as an open source project. The importance there is, first of all, customers have a voice into what goes on in the development effort. So SONiC has a very vibrant community of developers.
Hello and welcome to the Critical Lowdown. My name is Barry McGinley. I'm the head of technical for EMEA for EPS Global. And today we're going to have a chat with one of our hardware vendors in open networking and then some of the software within that. So I'm joined today by Paul Lysander from Celestica. Paul is on the product management team in the hardware platform solutions group at Celestica. His primary responsibility is the SONiC platform within that. And so anyone who doesn't know the SONiC platform, SONiC was Microsoft Azure's operating system, which they open sourced, and SONiC stands for Software for Open Networking in the Cloud. So Paul, it's great to have you on the Critical Lowdown, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Barry. I'm glad to be here with you and to discuss SONiC.
Cool. Great. So let's jump in. So I know Celestica are strong in open networking across a range of hardware. So you've got 1 to 800 gig switches. From Celestica's viewpoint, though, how is this open approach and specifically SONiC enabling you guys to deliver modern networks for data centers and for enterprise deployments now as well?
It's interesting. We've seen a definite trend with customers that we've spoken to around open networking and disaggregation. So traditionally, the networking space has been focused and driven by traditional OEMs that own the hardware. They develop the hardware and they develop the software, and both the hardware and software is closed. But in general, it seems that there is a trend towards moving away from that model. Certainly, the traditional OEMs still have a strong value proposition for what they offer to their customers and to potentially some of their new offerings that they're bringing to market as well. But there is a significant conversation that's happening in the industry that for customers that are saying we want more choice. So SONiC has this tagline that it's the Linux of networking. I think that's a pretty good tagline because, of course, Linux, very similar trajectory that it brought the open operating system to customers as a choice, to users as a choice. Very similar trajectory for SONiC. So again, we're seeing a lot of customers that have been looking at SONiC as a viable choice for their own environments. And in some cases that they're going to be moving full force into using SONiC. In other cases, they're going to be evaluating and potentially looking at bringing SONiC into at least part of their network.
Okay, yeah. And actually going a little bit deeper into SONiC. So the ecosystem obviously involves the hardware vendors, software developers, open community as well, because there's the open source version. So how crucial is that kind of diverse ecosystem for the future, for its adoption, and how does that benefit the end user?
So the openness is really the strength of SONiC, and Microsoft made a really critical decision when they decided to open source SONiC and hand it over to the Linux Foundation to manage it as a project, as an open source project. The importance there is, first of all, customers have a voice into what goes on in the development effort. So SONiC has a very vibrant community of developers that come from a broad set of vendors, and also there are customers that have a strong voice into what's happening around the entire development trajectory. So it's pretty crucial. The whole diverse ecosystem is crucial to SONiC and its adoption and even its growth. So if you look at the critical features that have come along in the last little while, obviously it's been primarily driven around the data center and hyperscalers. You could think of as very large data center deployments, because that's really what they are. And it's slowly moving into the enterprise as well. And we can certainly talk about that at some point.
Yeah, because we did see that at the start. Like I've been hearing about SONiC for, I don't know, is it a decade now? And with each deployment, so I know there's Alibaba, there was eBay, LinkedIn. With each deployment, they were adding more features to get it to the point where somebody that didn't have maybe 200 engineers could actually use it. I know we're at that point now. So do you see open networking following? You did mention it, the kind of Linux-like adoption curve, or are there limits unique to open networking and the operations of, say, a data center deployment?
Well, the underlying OS for SONiC is Linux. It's based on Debian Linux. So Linux obviously has been probably the champion when it comes to open source software in general. That's really what's kicked off open source to a very large extent. It wasn't solely Linux, but it certainly was a big player. So the Linux Foundation, which is now essentially the organization that manages the SONiC project as an open source project. It's no accident that obviously with Microsoft taking on the initial development of SONiC and then handing off to the Linux Foundation, they do follow very similar trajectories. And the companies that are really looking at it to a very large extent are also in large part Linux users as well. It's very seldom that you're going to see an organization that is completely looking at closed source in every other part of their environment, but looking only at open source in terms of networking. That's probably not going to happen. In general, it's going to be customers that are open to open source software in other parts of their environment as well. So they do track pretty closely, whether it be in a broader macro scale or whether it be within an individual company or organization.
Yeah, so I think SONiC did spend a little bit of time with the OCP, with the Open Compute Project, before it went to Linux Foundation. And I love the OCP, but the Linux Foundation, this is what it's about. It's about open source projects, and they run it quite well. Whereas I think sometimes the OCP is focused on a lot of kind of liquid cooling stuff and maybe more about the building rather than something like SONiC. So I think it's in the right place now. So are there any external trends? And by that, I kind of mean AI, ML stuff, supply chain, maybe sustainability goals that are accelerating interest in disaggregated networks.
Definitely. So obviously the big one is artificial intelligence. So AI is front and center when it comes to what's happening in the industry overall, and all things sort of are pointing to that trend. So when you look at networking, when you think about the impact on the network with respect to data flows and the sheer amount of data that's having to traverse the network with respect to the edge coming into where the AI is being processed, it's huge data flows. And so there's a lot of development going on around QoS mechanisms, around even from a vendor perspective, to be able to bring higher performance switching to the market, switch ASICs, and then of course that bubbles up into the switches themselves. So clearly that's a big trend. The other one is certainly enterprise networking. So that's the other big piece of it. And with the PENS working group around bringing enterprise features into SONiC, which of course SONiC was traditionally focus on the data center, that's another big trend. So I think those two trends together are definitely, bringing a lot of focus and momentum and interest with respect to SONiC for enterprise customers. When it comes to data center, the two sets of requirements, data center versus enterprise, they're similar but different, right? So IP networking in the data center versus IP networking in the enterprise, are similar but different. With the data center, it's all about low latency, east-west traffic, east-west security. Whereas in the enterprise, it's going to be about security is different. Security is about user level security. So DAL1X, as an example, or AAA, TACAX, Radius. That's not as big an issue in the data center as it would be obviously in the enterprise. So there's a whole different set of features that are required in enterprise networking that are unique to enterprise networking, enterprise campus versus the data center. So there's several things at play, but I think together they are tracking very closely with respect to efforts that are happening within working groups in the SONiC community.
Yeah, and like I saw the announcement by Broadcom, was it last week, 1.6 terabit, the Tomahawk 6. So I see how things are moving there. But within SONiC itself, though, on the feature side, what kind of lends itself to the AI application?
Yes, that's an important question. So certainly I would say the QoS features like Rocky V2, which has been around for a short time now, but anything to do with how to deal with the sheer flow of traffic for AI workloads, that's a big piece of it. And then, of course, when you look at, you mentioned about Broadcom announcing the Tomahawk 6, so we'll see, other vendors also bringing newer, switch ASICs to market that are higher performance, and so on. And then when you look at even what's happening around other features like MC-Lag's been there for a while, EVPN multi-homing, but then there's ESI. So there's evolution that's happening around how to deploy, Tor, leaf spine, 3-tier or class-based designs into the data center. There's other sorts of features that are making their way in. And then, of course, there's a whole effort around, because SONiC is this is one of the brilliant architectural decisions that was made early on, was SONiC as a set of features, like at the SONiC layer, it has independence from the ASIC via this layer called SI, right, which is the switch abstraction interface. So that was a brilliant move in terms of the architectural decision that was made, because that brings much more choice around silicon vendors, the switch ASIC vendors. So that's another piece of it. So as they bring in other features at the switch ASIC level, that'll start to bubble up into what's going to happen within the SONiC layer, which sits 2 layers above it.
Yeah, it just seems crazy. We're talking about the 1.6 terabyte. I think you can get 1,024 gig ports on it. That's just mad. So let's say looking at a migration path for a customer. So imagine we have a Juniper customer. What does that move look like for them to move to a disaggregated model?
So an enterprise customer that has already, it's a brownfield opportunity. So in other words, they've got something in place already. Typically they're not going to just, switch over completely to not just a new vendor, but a completely new operating system. So typically most enterprises, what they do is they'll obviously start by evaluating in a lab environment. Then what they'll do is they'll start to deploy it within their enterprise and maybe non-mission critical areas of the network. And then as they get more accustomed to the features, the experience, how to manage it, like more of the, it's not that just day 0 and day 1, but the day 2 operational piece of it. That's a big piece for a customer as they start to understand the tooling, like what sorts of management tools that they can leverage, even within the open source community. If they, like Ansible or other sorts of tools like that, then they'll start to slowly migrate the rest of their network over to SONiC. That's a typical movement from a customer perspective. So obviously, as they maybe build up, a customer that's building out their network, maybe new buildings, new locations, they may choose as a greenfield location to put in SONiC, from day 0. That is also another path that they may choose to follow. So I would say it'll be a slow migration, but it'll be a slow and steady migration. And that's what we're seeing in our customer base as well.
Okay, great. So you did touch on the enterprise stuff, so I want to kind of get into that a little bit. So look, you guys are strong in the data center, but SONiC is making inroads into the enterprise market, and this has been like a pain point for us for a decade now. So we started. So it was nearly all data center, and then we started to have kind of 1 gig PoE switches, and Cumulus was starting to have a bit of traction there. So Cumulus, which was eventually bought by Mellanox, bought by NVIDIA, they were because customers were saying to them, well, we want to actually manage our enterprise network with the same tools that we're using for our data center, because they were using Cumulus within the data center. But then obviously Cumulus were acquired again as well. Obviously, the price point has to be good for enterprise. And the 1 gig switches were predominantly for top of rack in the data center. They actually weren't being built with PoE and what you mentioned earlier on. So you've recently introduced new enterprise switches that support SONiC. So can you kind of tell us a little bit more about your ES range?
Sure. So as you mentioned, we have switches certainly for the data center, and that's that movement is going well in terms of enterprise data center deployments. But we also have a line of enterprise switches that's focused on the enterprise and campus. So the feature sets there are certainly going to be similar, like we talked about earlier. There's definitely an overlap between the data center IP networking versus enterprise IP networking, but there are features that are unique to the enterprise. So PoE is certainly one of them. There's 802.1x is another one. There's AAA and all of the user-based authentication sort of features that are required for onboarding an end user and an endpoint in a campus environment to get them onto the network and authenticate it properly. There's other things like there's voice traffic. So of course voice traffic has to be treated differently. It needs to be on a separate VLAN. So we support voice VLAN type of features to be able to segment and treat voice traffic differently because its characteristics are different, and so it needs to be treated differently. LLDP, so link layer discovery protocol, to be able to discover devices as they get plugged into a switch, and whether it be an IP phone or any other type of device. So those sorts of things I think are critical for an enterprise to think about in terms of the features that are of most interest to them. Now, we mentioned earlier about the PENS working group, and there's subgroups there that are working on specific features. Celestica is certainly thrilled to be part of that initiative around developing features for the open source community. Until those features are actually fully vetted, because they have to be accepted by the member organizations that are part of PENS to be incorporated into SONiC, into the open source repo, the GitHub repo. Until that happens, we still want to bring those features to customers in the interim. So our strategy is to embrace what's available in the community. If features are not available yet, then we'll develop it in-house and offer it within our SONiC. And then once it's available in the open source community, then we'll make that decision to pivot over to that version of that particular feature.
Great. So there's a working solution as it stands now for an enterprise deployment. Great.
That's right.
And so we've seen, obviously, with SONiC, we've talked about AI, multi-cloud, retail, telco deployments. We're actually running a high-frequency trading POC at the minute. What do you think is the best use case to showcase SONiC's ability, and why?
Because its roots are in the data center, with hyperscalers. That seems to be the one that probably resonates with most customers for a number of reasons. First of all, the feature set that's available today is very rich in the data center / hyperscaler sort of deployments. So the typical 3-tier, class design with top of rack, a leaf and spine. So that's probably where customers, because they do know that hyperscalers use SONiC within their own cloud environment, or a flavor of SONiC, that's probably what's going to resonate the most. The enterprise is going to be, and I think, of the next phase, because again, the features are different. and they're being developed. And we do offer those sets of features within our own SONiC. That is going to probably be the next phase. So I would say it's going to start in the core within the data center and move its way towards the edge.
Okay, yeah, that is what we're seeing ourselves as well. So obviously the hardware and the software are separate, so they're distinctly separate, which adds, I suppose, a bit of hassle for customers. How do you guys approach this? And us being a distribution partner, is there a role for us to play in kind of scenarios here with hardware and software? Because customers do they say they love it, they love the separation, but when it actually comes to it, they don't want to be messing around with putting software onto boxes. And I know there's no licensing with SONiC, but what is the best way of making this easier for customers?
So we are happy to partner with folks like EPS Global. We see you as a value partner, and you provide a huge value add, right? So certainly from a fulfillment perspective, the ability to provide the end product to a customer, to partner with them around things like you mentioned, you're working on a POC. I'm sure you're working on multiple POCs. So that level of engagement is critical because customers want someone that they can work with closely in those sorts of scenarios. So when it comes to fulfillment, certainly going one step back with respect to that initial engagement, understanding the features, understanding it to the point of actually testing it, kicking the tires on it, doing a POC, and then actually deploying it. That's where partners like EPS Global are so critical to making SONiC deployment successful.
Okay, great. So looking at the future a little bit, I see you guys won a Dell Oro award for your 800 gig switch. We kind of looked at 1.6 gigs, or terabytes, I should say. I don't think you're going to be making any sort of announcement today, but have you got what's in the pipeline? What's coming down the road with Celestica hardware and SONiC as well?
So certainly the DS5000 is our flagship, high-end switch today, which is based on Tomahawk 5. As are the silicon vendors that we work with, release the next generation ASICs, will certainly work on bringing products to market that leverage the latest and greatest technology. So that's on the hardware layer. From a SONiC perspective, we'll continue to work within the community to bring the next generation set of features within SONiC itself. And then both for the data center as well as the enterprise. So those both are parallel tracks for us. We're certainly working within the community to leverage what's happening within the community members around features for the data center. And then for the enterprise, as I mentioned, there's a whole separate track around bringing that unique set of features that are required for the enterprise campus environment.
And which area are you most excited about going forward? Is it the enterprise? You seem kind of sweet on the enterprise play. So is that where you see kind of the most gains coming down the road?
I'm excited for both tracks, quite honestly. But SONiC has already been in the data center and hyperscaler environment, so that's already well known. I think the enterprise play is where it's less known, and so that's where there is going to be greater momentum within the community from the PENS working group, and it's a matter of exactly how that's going to play out. So we're certainly focused on both the data center play as well as the enterprise, which is why we have a distinct set of products that play into both those environments.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's another string to our bow. Obviously, we haven't really had an enterprise play for a long time, as I said, since probably 7 or 8 years since Cumulus. So it's great to have it. Okay, so finally, for our listeners who are maybe considering Celestica with SONiC sitting on top, what advice would you give them for a successful engagement?
The first thing is really to get educated on what SONiC provides. That's the first thing, the first step. And there's lots of resources. There's even within the you mentioned OCP, the OCP Global Summit that's happening later this year. in San Jose, there's an entire track just on SONiC.
Yeah.
And for past events, those recordings are available on YouTube. So definitely the first step is to really get educated on SONiC and what it provides. And if you were to actually research it, if someone who's interested wanted to really research it, they would see that there's a huge community and a very active community, both from a vendor perspective as well as from a customer perspective, that is eager to deploy SONiC within their own environments. So that's the first thing, is the education piece. The second piece of it is to actually try it within a lab environment, to work with folks like yourselves, to do POCs, to replicate their own environments that are non-SONiC within a SONiC sort of POC, to see how do those features work, and how does SONiC behave, and what kind of tools are available to manage SONiC. We mentioned Ansible earlier on. There's other open source solutions, as well as partners that offer orchestration solutions for SONiC. There are also partners that provide their own software solutions for easing the migration from a proprietary NOS over to SONiC. They actually help to do that migration for configurations from from an OEM vendor over to SONiC. So there's a lot of things in play there. So I think education first, kicking the tires, trying it out, and within a lab environment, maybe within part of the network, that they can start to experience how SONiC behaves and how it works, get a very solid comfort level, and then start to do a broader deployment within their enterprise.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. And there really is a full ecosystem there now, with orchestration, really good hardware, and well-featured software. So final question, I always kind of ask this one. Where do you see open networking in 5 years' time?
5 years is a long time. I mean, it's hard to imagine 5 years, but I'll just say, even in the short to medium term, that it's going to continue to gain momentum in the industry, as well as within enterprise customers. So we see, from all that we're hearing and all that we're experiencing ourselves within our customer engagements, that there's a greater interest, like not just at the periphery, but actually looking to do POCs and doing testing. There's a greater interest for SONiC this year than there was even last year. So in 5 years, we anticipate that there'll be that much more interest and that much more traction with SONiC around these large enterprise customers, as well as small, medium businesses as well.
Brilliant. I'm looking forward to the next 5 years. Paul, thank you very much for your time today. That was really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And anyone who wants to get in touch about, as Paul said, the journey for open networking, educating yourself, and once you're ready to move to the next step, EPS Global will be happy to help you move from there.